Hello YouTubers out there, this is Jerry Sadavi at the movies. So it is, as of I think March 4th or 3rd, I think it was March 4th of 2022, was the 100th anniversary of FW Murnau's famous, at one time infamous, Bram Stoker adaptation, Nosferatu, which came out in 1922. And of course stars Max Schreck as Count Orlok, or depending on which version of the film you watch, of which there are many, either speeded up or slowed down. I've mostly seen the speeded up versions, and because silent movies in those days were they were cranked at a different rate of speed, and depending which version you see, some of the credits list him as Count Dracula. And the story goes that Florence Stoker, Bram Stoker's widow, that time he was not alive, to see what happened. Whether he would have sued or not, I don't know, but she certainly sued and wanted all copies of the film of Nosferatu to be burned. And thankfully, that did not happen. Nosferatu is one of the greatest vampire films ever made. I would say it works in tandem with Werner Herzog's 1979 remake, which I think is a very beautiful film, and slightly different in not necessarily concept or tone, but in overall perhaps black humor. And that's really the big difference, aside from the fact that Klaus Kinski plays Count Orlok. And Orlok, by the way, was a name used in Peter Bogdanovich's 1968 film Targets. That was the name of Boris Karloff's horror movie actor character named Orlok, which is quite interesting to know. So it is, but it's still, I mean, those two are great films. You watch a vampire movie, you could watch any vampire movie, and most of them, to some degree, are about the same. Whether it's Christopher Lee's Dracula, Bela Lugosi's Dracula, certainly that one is even more of a silent film in many respects, because it doesn't have really a musical score. But most vampire movies are pretty much straight, in terms of what they're doing and how they're, in particular, the story of Dracula. The most flamboyant might be Francis Ford Coppola's version. But in general, it's very much, this is a vampire, this is Count Dracula, and we see the fangs and the horror and everything else. Nosferatu is, as far as anyone knows, there might have been an earlier adaptation of Dracula. But Nosferatu from 1922 is the first official Dracula movie. In many ways, almost the first vampire movie. There were a couple of other vampire films prior to 1922's Nosferatu, but they haven't survived. So there are a couple of things that I think are good to know about Nosferatu, and I've written about, Nosferatu before. It's the actual name Nosferatu. Now, that the name itself is derived from the Old Slavonic word Nosu Furatu, which is borrowed from the Greek word Nosophoros, which means plague carrier. The term does not actually mean undead. I think that's really important. And yet when you watch a lot of vampire movies, particularly even latter day to me, from the 70s on, or even prior to that, of Dracula adaptations, they always bring up Nosferatu, as if, the undead. And even Frank Langella's Dracula, in, of course, the film Dracula from 1979, he says, oh no, it means not dead. But actually it does not mean that at all. Nosferatu means basically plague carrier. And that is very apropos to the original 1922 film, because if you think about it, first of all, the character of Count Orlok doesn't look like your regular vampire. He's bald, he has almost rat-like ears, he has what seem like two fangs, but they don't seem like fangs, and they're protruding from the front of his mouth, and he's almost like a rat. He looks like a rat, and he looks like somebody that was really ravaged by a disease, namely vampirism. So that's very apropos. Now, and let's get back to the origin of the word Nosferatu for a second. The meaning extends to, actually it exists thanks to Bram Stoker, who of course wrote Dracula back in 1897. So Stoker's novel is of course set in Transylvania and London, but the author himself never set foot in Transylvania. So his knowledge of the country came from Emily Gerard's travelogue entitled Land Beyond the Forest from 1885. And in this travelogue, which is essentially a guide to the wonders of Transylvania, it is the first known book to mention the word Nosferatu as an actual being or as someone undead. And so the excerpt from Gerard's book reads, and I quote, "More decidedly evil is the Nosferatu, or vampire, in which every Romanian peasant believes, as he does, in heaven or hell." But at the same time, because of the meaning of the word itself, we're just going to say that actually it means plague carrier. So we'll leave it at that. But it's a common misconception to think of it as a actual as the undead. So probably Emily Gerard's definition is closer. Now, there isn't a whole lot I can really say about Nosferatu other than what everybody knows. There are been a lot of changes from Bram Stoker's novel, to say the least. It's all set in Germany. Count Orlok is played by Max Schreck, obviously Dracula. And there's a real estate deal with Thomas Hutter. And this is back at Orlok's castle in Transylvania, and wanting to buy an abandoned house in Bremen, depending on which film version you've seen. Again, there are variations on this film because it's been in the public domain for so long. In fact, I venture to guess it may still be in the public domain. Now, the other thing about Nosferatu is that Ellen, who is basically Mina and Lucy combined, and she's played by Greta Schroeder. So she's Hutter's wife. She sort of has a psychic connection to Hutter and Orlok, which is very interesting. Orlok arrives in her bedroom, and this is towards the climax of the picture, and the property is a building directly opposite to her house, seen through her bedroom window. And she decides the best thing to do to save her husband is to keep the vampire in blood-drinking mode through the night until the first cocks crow. So the sunlight peers through the window and destroys Count Orlok. And that's kind of how that story ends, not unlike how it was done in the Klaus Kinski version. The homage has existed either in Werner Herzog's remake or actually in Stephen King's homage in Salem's Lot. Because, like I said, no vampire in film history has ever looked anything remotely like Count Orlok. There's just nothing else to really compare him to. He looks like an actual. He looks like an animal, and that's really the thing. He looks like an animal, and yet the film itself. What's interesting is that it resembles almost a documentary of the times. You know, there are a lot of shots in the picture. There are some that are used like a negative of a positive when Count Orlok's carriage is arriving at the castle. But more than that, there are just moments when he's carrying a coffin and he's walking through the streets, and you know, in those days they didn't have the lighting to help make a night shot visible, so they shot day for night. And when he's walking around and you see all these rats around, and then the people, the townsfolk, painting with a cross each one of the doors where somebody is carrying essentially the plague, or is a plague carrier for that matter, the film then becomes something from another time. It's almost as if somebody had a film camera and was recording what was happening to this town. It's really quite remarkable, the picture. Another thing I love about the picture is also that Count Orlok, usually it's implied when he bites someone. So you see his shadow through the wall, or on the wall, I should say, and as it descends onto the victim, as opposed to a close-up of him biting somebody, which of course we've seen in countless other vampire movies. But Nosferatu decided it is the kind of picture by FW Murnau to suggest more so than show anything explicitly, and that's what I love about it. It's been said that Max Schreck, the actor, his features throughout the movie got more and more pronounced, so that he would seem more and more grotesque as the film unfolded, and that's quite interesting. But let's be honest, I don't think there's even a Halloween costume out there for Count Orlok. There is for Bela Lugosi's Dracula. I don't think there's one for Count Orlok, but maybe somebody's created one. And the other aspect to the film is its German expressionist motifs, particularly every shot that's diagonally composed. The arrival of the carriage in particular is diagonally composed. A lot of these shots create distortion, which is essentially a German expressionist visual cue. The extreme shadows, as I mentioned earlier, the negative of a positive shot. The acting is over the top, which is essential because it shows all these wild gestures, which a lot of silent films had that. But this was the Germans, in particularly in silent films, they had a heightened emotional response, which was part of their German expressionist view, and this was necessary to convey this subjective feelings over an objective reality. So although Nosferatu is not really a realistic picture, but the feelings and emotions are very well expressed, particularly by Ellen, Hutter, and Nock, who is the Renfield type character, if I remember. So it's a fascinating film. It is absolutely worth celebrating. I'm glad the film survived. There is no other film like Nosferatu. It's become iconic. It's been featured in a lot of music videos and other films. Rob Zombie certainly paid a lot of homage to Nosferatu in his own videos. So it's really it is a remarkable film just to watch from a visual standpoint, but it is a very creepy film because it really looks like we're looking at a real vampire, somebody that's just been, as I said earlier, ravaged by a disease of some kind, and that's what really makes that film come alive in ways that no other vampire film since has even looked like this at all. This is also, by the way, the first film to invent the idea of sunlight destroying a vampire. If you know Bram Stoker's Dracula novel, Dracula is mostly powerless during the day, but sunlight doesn't necessarily kill him. And but ever since Nosferatu, sunlight somehow is a destructive thing, as opposed to something where Count Dracula or any vampire really can just walk around powerless to sunlight. So that's where it really all started. And as I forgot, I see in my notes, reportedly, but this may have changed since, the first vampire film ever made was Great Britain's The Secret of House Number 5 in 1912. This is according to a book that I highly recommend called The Vampire Book, the Encyclopedia of the Undead by J. Gordon Melton. Other people have mentioned it, and it's certainly worth reading and owning. It's really quite something to see. There also is a shot in the picture where, now keep in mind, as I said earlier, some prints, they run 60 minutes and others run about an hour and a half. So it depends on the rate of speed, as we said earlier, how it was cranked. As we know, a lot of silent films tend to, unless they're, I guess the word would be undercranked, everything is, faster than it should be. There is a moment that I found quite gripping, and it was a scene where there's the shadow of Orlok's hand as it grabs Ellen's heart. I mean, it is an amazing, amazing shot. It's stuff like that that really, the use of shadows, the diagonally composed shots, the heightened emotions from the lead characters, the exaggeration of this Count Orlok as he gets more and more exaggerated in his look and demeanor. Everything about this is just an extraordinary film. If you like vampire films, you have to watch Nosferatu. I highly recommend it, and Werner Herzog's remake. So, yes, celebrate 100 years of a most magnificent film. And that's all I got to say about that. If you like what you hear, or if I made some mistakes in certain things I've said about undercranking or overcranking, please let me know. Sometimes I get them confused, but that's how it is. Or if you came across any other interesting facts about Nosferatu. I haven't really researched the film in a while. I researched it a long time ago, and of course listened to the commentary on the DVD edition of Nosferatu from Lockie Heiss, I believe was his name. So, but who knows? He may have found other things, or a different version, or who knows what. Just let me know. Tell me anything you want to know. I mean, or have discovered, I guess I should say, about this film. I would like to hear about it. So that's all I got to say about that. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to Jerry Sadovia at the Movies. And this is Jerry Sadovia at the Movies, signing off.